Welcome back, everybody, to another RoboTaxi Report. First and foremost, I am still on FSD Beta 10.8.1 with no idea when I will finally be getting an update, hopefully 10.10 sometime soon. So what this gives us is a fourth week on the same software patch. So it's important to realize that everything you're about to see should not be indicative of improvement, but rather developing a more robust sample size that we can then benchmark in the future to see actual change, whether it be improvement or regression. So let's go ahead and jump into our RoboTaxi results, taking a look at now 4 weeks of data. And what you'll notice that goes in line with my statement about it being a more robust sample size rather than a measure of improvement, you'll see that we're back down to 52% success with this latest week covering January 31st to February 6th. This time, thanks to feedback, I've got a bit more information on the screen to help illustrate what's going on, total, success, and failure, and then the numerical values to show you how the vehicle's performing. Now, I'm trying to increase my weekly activity to bring rides up. I'm aiming for this next RoboTaxi report coming out on the 14th to have closer to 100 plus trips to measure. And hopefully it'll be some new data on a new software stack, but I'm not holding my breath at this point. For now, I'm just going to gather all the good data I can on 10.8.1. But one important key metric here to remember is that a successful trip requires 0 disengagements. The customer needs to be able to get from pickup to drop off without me getting involved. Otherwise, they wouldn't make it. I know I've said that a few times before, but for anyone who's just tuning in to the RoboTaxi report, it's good to know that a success for RoboTaxi trips is rather strict. That being said, we're seeing a pretty good consistency around the 50% mark, especially when you take into account what you're seeing here, with that last bar being cumulative trips from January 10th till February 6th. Much larger numbers, of course, because if you add everything up, it should come out to 244 total trips with 121 successes and 123 failures, putting it very close to a 50-50. It's actually 49.6% success. It's such a small value that you could say 50-50, but as you're looking at it, 49 to 51 is a little bit easier to wrap your head around with differing numbers. Whenever I finally do get an updated software stack, whether it's 10.10, version 11, or whenever I'm finally updated, what we'll do is we'll take that last bar, that cumulative total, and that'll be measured against future builds. So in essence, the 4 bars measured, one every week of the last 4 weeks, those are going to melt away in future episodes into that final one. For some, that might have been obvious, but I think that is important to see that last bar, that cumulative one, is not additional. It's representative of the other 4 together. This does bring back an earlier comment I made on one of the earlier episodes about how consistent 10.8 is. It might not look that way with that 56% sticking out there like a sore thumb, but when you're measuring data over a larger scale, you're going to have little outliers and such, but ultimately it comes down to a pretty consistent balance if everything is measured consistently. This would be a good indicator of consistency in recording as well. With all things being equal, the data should come out in a way that reflects annotated consistency. Moving forward from the RoboTaxi portion, we'll take a look at disengagements. This is a metric that's garnered a lot of curiosity from viewers, and I'm happy for the feedback I've received because it's allowed me to get more detailed and to better explain what you're seeing here on the screen. So on the top, we have last week's data covering nearly 1,600 kilometers of travel with a total disengagement number of 46, simple disengagements, the little d, 36, and critical disengagements of 10. You'll notice a nod back to the consistency when we look at the most recent data showing 42 total disengagements, 35 simple, and 7 critical. Now on the graphs, it's important to highlight that more is better. When it comes to the simple and critical disengagements represented on each graph, the more distance covered, the better the system is performing. When looking at the simple category for disengagements per kilometer driven, it's important to know that that's the total disengagement number divided from the distance driven. Whether it's simple or critical, they're all disengagements. So 34 kilometers traveled per disengagement from the previous week is reflective of that 46 number divided out of 1593. The same can be said for our most recent week, and then the overall on the right side of the screen. And this is also where it's important to realize that this should not be looked at as improvement. It can be tempting to look at each of these weeks and conclude that there may be a measure of improvement happening with going further between disengagements. But keep in mind again that we're still on the same 10.8.1 software. So it's important not to get ahead of ourselves in thinking that, and it's reflected well in the overall portion to the right, where you see the total from the 24th till Sunday the 6th. And at the bottom, I've given the total distance traveled, and then the time as well. That's the total time traveled completely on autonomy. So you can derive how long it takes between disengagements I don't find that quite as important, but please let me know if you do, and I can include that in a graph as well. Or you can do a little math at home if you really care to and figure out those numbers yourself. But here you see that there's a total disengagements over 3,600 kilometers of 88 with 71 simple and 17 critical. And the number showed on the graph sits right in between what you're seeing from the previous week and the most recent week. Again, highlighting that this is becoming a more robust sample size that we can measure against later. What you're seeing now is actually thanks to a viewer recommendation to show a metric on a 500 kilometer basis. So we're looking at critical disengagements every 500 kilometers. And what you're seeing is that on the previous week's data, the January 24th to 30th, there's a critical disengagement 3 times roughly in 500 kilometers. It's important to note that the next data point is not a separate week, but rather the cumulative look from the 24th of January to the 6th of February. And it's showing that it's down to 2.3 disengagements, critical disengagements, safety concern disengagements, as you see at the bottom, per 500 kilometers. Now, over time, as we finally get updates, like 10.10, version 11, and so on, we'll be able to develop a bit of a trend and follow that line down as we get our way closer and closer towards zero. And with some intense thinking and maybe some complicated math, could derive an actual point at which the system reaches zero, but it's going to be a little tricky considering that as the scale of data gained increases and improvements are made in the training of the system at Tesla, it likely won't be linear. I don't know that it'll be exponential. I'm kind of excited to figure out what it will be, and we will figure that out with more information going forward. It's not a whole lot to see here because I don't have a lot of information yet, especially again on the same software stack. Come on, Tesla, give me an update. And finally, as we bring this episode to a close, we'll take a look at overall usage data, just showing 10.8.1's sample size continuing to grow and make those numbers a bit more precise compared to previous builds, 10.2 to 10.8. So we've come down a little bit on the manual driving from 1.5% to 1.3. I expect that to gradually decrease over time. It'll be a lot more impressive to see future updates. Figured I'd also throw in a few more metrics here so you can see that I've got well over 200 hours on the beta. Hopefully you made it this far because I want to go over the things that I'm going to be covering in future episodes thanks to all the wonderful feedback from viewers. On top of disengagements, I will be adding in intervention. Some important notes here, and this largely is my opinion, but I'm going to be very picky with the interventions because I think there's a fine line between the car's limitations and driver preference. Now, this isn't to talk sideways or throw any shade at other beta testers, but a lot of disengagements and interventions tend to be more driver preference or a lack of risk allowance. Now, granted, when it comes to the RoboTaxi side driving with customers, I have a very low risk tolerance because I am more so concerned with customer comfort and safety and confidence, and I'm not as willing to let the car do risky things with other people in the car. Now, by myself, very, very risk tolerant. I've grown very intimately aware of what the car can do with over 200 hours on the beta. I would venture to say that I have already surpassed all the other beta testers in my time with the system, just given how much I drive every day. Now, that is a big assumption because no other beta tester has really shown how many hours they've actually gotten on the system or how much distance they've actually covered. But I've gone now well over 25,000 kilometers since getting the beta, 7,600 of those kilometers on the beta itself. And that's where the 214 hours of usage comes from. That number will only get bigger as we finally get the stack merger. But because of my experience with the system, I try to be a lot more strict and a lot less human-minded when it comes to how the car operates. That's a long-winded way of saying that when it comes to interventions, I'm only going to count things that would otherwise prevent the vehicle from continuing. I don't hit the turn signal to make it change lanes, and I only ever adjust the speed limiter if and when I'm in a situation where the car has not registered a speed limit change and there's enough of a difference where it's an issue. As an example, public to beta changes, or in other words, highway to city speed limit changes. Hopefully with the version 11 stack merger, a lot of that goes away. Generally, 15 to 20 seconds after getting on another street, the speed limit change will finally happen. I've tested that during less busy times of the day, like early morning or late night, and I don't take over or intervene just because I'm getting impatient or feel that the car isn't doing it good enough. That's a good way to have skewed data because of your own biases versus actually objectively seeing what the car can and cannot do. Keep that in mind in future episodes when I do include intervention data. It might not look like what Dirty Tesla shows or other beta testers because we're not measuring it exactly in the same way. I would love to be able to cross my notes with other beta testers in the future. I did leave a comment like that on Dirty Tesla's channel that I'd be excited to see how our data compares because he's one of the guys I've been following the longest. Now, on the note of city and highway, another viewer brought up a good point that that, I can pretty easily differentiate where the disengagements are happening, whether it's happening on the highway or on the city streets, where there are two very different difficulty settings. One could argue the highway is more critical because of speed and the irrational maneuvers of humans, but then city streets having a lot more complication with turn signals, stop signs, and everything in between. Along with that, I can also start to add causation. So whether it's construction or a bad human driver or a pedestrian crossing the street, a navigational issue, a speed issue, a law issue, I should be able to note those as well. How I'll represent that on the videos is a little tricky because that's a lot of information. But if I can make it happen, I think that would be pretty fun. And finally, I can give an overall view of regional difficulty, looking at a map of Southern California and just kind of painting a picture of where the car has an easier time, a more difficult time, to kind of show you what I've experienced over those 200 plus hours of usage. But that about wraps up this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please, again, as always, leave your feedback in the comments. I absolutely love the suggestions and ways to look at things over time, and better ways to express the information visually so that it's less confusing, more intuitive, easier to follow. I'll continue to iterate on these and bring you more and more data as we go forward. If you enjoy this, throw me a like and stay subscribed to get notified of future videos. I try to post 2 to 3 a week, but you can count on a RoboTaxi Report every Monday. Thanks again for your time, everybody. I appreciate you greatly, and I will catch you in the next video.